This is Danny Flexen here for Seconds Out. Delighted to be joined by my good friend and one half of SJAM Boxing, Adam Morallee. Adam, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Danny. How are you?
I'm good. The last time we spoke on camera was some sort of bar that had video games in it, and we spoke to you, Joe, and a few others about an impending fight we thought at the time between him and Joseph Parker. And I think at the time the videos were embargoed until the fight was officially announced.
Yeah.
We ended up making some cuts and putting it out anyway. About 3 months down the line, the fight has now finally been announced. How tough has it been getting from where we were then to where we are now?
I mean, the reason why we had that event where we invited all the media and you spoke to Joe and everyone spoke to Joe was because Joe was flying off to Vegas and we were basically going to announce the fight after he'd flown off to Vegas because we thought it was 99% done. But I thought that fight was 99% done for, I don't know, 2, 3 months. And then after that moment, I can't remember, that was probably late May or something, the fight fell out. And when it fell out, and then we went and fought Hammer, I thought it was a very low percentage chance of happening. So it was pretty amazing actually that it turned around.
How involved were you in the negotiations? Because I know obviously Queensbury took the lead.
Yeah, I mean, really, I shouldn't have been that involved because the negotiation is between Queensbury and Joyce, which had happened, and between Queensbury and Boxer as promoter for Joseph Parker. So really, I shouldn't have been that involved, but I was involved because obviously I worked very closely with George Warren in particular about everything to do with Joe. And then Ben Shalom, I know because I've got fighters with him. And sometimes when there were breakdown in those negotiations, I would talk to Ben about them formally or informally, and we try to work our way through. And to be fair to Ben, he was pretty reasonable throughout. And I just kind of, I always knew that even though Ben Shalom and Boxer now own Joe Parker's right, and Joe Parker's a reasonable guy, I always knew that at some point they would have to go back to Parker or Higgins, and then the different sorts of demands would start again. So again, even that deal was done, almost done, and then very much struggled to get over the line.
What was the kind of biggest obstacle in negotiations and how was that overcome?
I think if you look at the deal as a whole, going back a few months, the biggest obstacle was probably that Joseph Parker and David Higgins were never 100% comfortable, I think, with the deal that was offered to them by the Warrens. And I think maybe they never said it. So then when Boxer came along and signed Joe Parker, that was an easy out for them. So I think that was the big obstacle there. I think without, disclosing too many secrets for the second fight, it was never really, I think money was agreed quite early. We never argued about things like who's on the side of the poster or who walks first or any of those things that sometimes people argue about. We argued about a lot of hypotheticals. So there's a rematch and what happens if someone's injured and then when does the rematch take, and other little hypotheticals like that. And I think, listen, David Higgins is the kind of guy who just never stops in terms of negotiation. He never stops thinking about the what ifs. And when you're the counterparty to that, it can get quite frustrating. But to be fair to him, he's trying to do the best for his client. He's kind of annoying and frustrating on one side of it, very annoying and very frustrating. But on the other side of it, he's constantly coming up with hypotheticals. Well, what if, what if, what if? And that takes up a lot of time. And then I think there were other minor things, but it was the what ifs that took up the time.
On that note, how was it decided which broadcaster and which promoter would take the lead in the fight, and will the rematch see a switch of that to the other side?
Yes, it will see a switch. And how is it decided? That was so. Just to come back to the story, when I thought it was over. Frank and George asked me to come up with a list of 10 opponents that Joe wanted for the 24th of September. Joe Parker was still at the top of those opponents. And to be fair to the Warrens and Ben Shalom, they got the fight back on. That had nothing to do with me. I don't know how they got it on together. I don't know what got them back together. They did those talks themselves and they got it done. And why was it BT? It was BT because I think at that moment, Joe's the number one. And the balance of power was such that although we really wanted that fight, because I think it's a brilliant fight for Joe to have full stop, and it's number 1v2, and we want it for the interim title. We're asking the WBO to make it for the interim title. Although we really want it, I think Joseph Parker didn't have that many options.
And if there is, what is the status with the rematch clause? Is it open to both fighters is it an option for them?
No. So the rematch clause only kicks in if Joyce loses.
Which isn't going to happen, right?
Which isn't going to happen. And I got asked that question a lot, actually. Why would you have a rematch clause if you're confident? The answer is it's business, and it's just an insurance policy. But yeah, only kicks in if Joyce loses.
Stuff. Now, the fight itself, how do you see it kind of panning out style-wise, and why was he the number one target for you, Joe Parker?
I think that in boxing, certainly in heavyweight boxing, is a little bit different in terms of when you're pushing a fighter on. For me, as Joe's manager, I want Joe to be involved in big fights. I think that's really important. I think someone like Derek Chisora is a great example of that. Many losses, but still always getting involved in big fights, being talked about fighting Tyson Fury now. Why is that? Because he's developed a persona for himself, because the public know him. And that's, I think, what we've really got to work on with Joe. Joe's got a brilliant personality. We've got to develop that personality, get it out there, and get him involved in big fights. And the Joe Parker fight ticks that box for me. I think also the Dillian Whyte fight would have ticked that box if we'd have got that fight, because those two are, in my opinion, the two. We could argue Ruiz, Ortiz, maybe, but outside the top guys, they're the biggest names. And so we wanted as big a fight as possible. So that's why we wanted the Parker fight. We want the biggest fight as possible for Joe Joyce. He is 36 years old, turning 37 in September. So that's why it was the number one fight. And then you look at, okay, what are the other benefits of it? WBO 1 v WBO 2, if it's made for the interim title, that has benefits that go on in terms of mandatory status, in terms of what happens if people vacate, and in terms of purse splits if a mandatory gets called. So there were benefits, kind of boxing benefits to the fight, but really for me, just want Joe to be in as big fights as possible. And that, I think, is the biggest fight we could make for Joe.
Do the WBO have the same rule that the WBC have about you can work out the purses based on the recent history of their purses?
Yeah, they do. But then there are different limits. So if you're not an interim champion and a mandatory is ordered, then the minimum it can be is 80-20. So let's say someone's had really small purses and they're fighting Usyk, who's been earning 10 million. And it, when you look at his purse, it should be 95-5, then it'll always be 80-20 minimum.
Sure.
That changes when you have an interim status attached to you. That purse split becomes more favourable, becomes more than 20%.
Yeah, I just find it interesting because obviously with Fury against Whyte, we thought that would change things because he was WBC interim, but it ended up being based on their recent purses.
Yeah, they don't have that rule in the WBC about the interim champion. The interim status in the WBO is they hand out that title far, far less. And the WBO, it has like a special meaning. So, for example, not that we want this to happen necessarily, but if you're the interim champ and the belt gets vacated, you then become the full champ.
Wow.
Email champion.
Yeah. You're going to regret saying that in about 6 months.
Well, that's true. You're still taking, though, wouldn't you? Still taking.
Oh, all day. Talking of that, though, you've got Joshua and Usyk clashing next week for a bunch of titles, including the WBO. How do you kind of see that one panning out? And whoever does win, do you see them vacate the belt?
As to how it pans out, I really would love Joshua to win it. I think it would be brilliant for British boxing. It would lead to the biggest fight, probably of all time, or in my lifetime, Joshua Fury. And
I thought you were going to say Joshua Joyce for a second. I thought
no, it would lead to Joshua Fury. I think. Listen, I've got an opinion, same as anyone else. My opinion is that Usyk probably wins. That's based on seeing Usyk last time. I thought he really dominated the fight. I think he's very, very elite in certain ways. I think he's very difficult to combat. I'm not sure how Joshua's game plan will change. It's none of my business ultimately. But I think Usyk will be the winner, probably by decision. And I think you're then in a situation where what happens to the belts? And Fury Usyk would be the most likely thing to occur next. And if Fury Usyk happens, hopefully it would happen this year. I'm not sure, I'm not saying it would, but hopefully it would happen this year. I understand that if it did happen in Saudi Arabia, they want to put it on at a certain time of year, and that is the end of December. And then you have a new year where the different belts will have different contenders. So you see, I think Ergovic, Zhang are in a final eliminator on the IBF side. Daniel Dubois sat there as the WBA regular champion. Joe's number 2 with the WBC, and Strangely Wild as number 1. And then Joe will, God willing, be the interim champion to WBO make it, and he wins the fight. So, it's always the case that a champion can't fight all his mandatories, and some belts have to be given up and some haven't. And I don't know who Usyk will give up, which ones he'll give up and which ones he won't, especially if there's an undisputed fight. But, it's a long-winded way of saying they're going to have to fight Joe. One's going to have to fight Joe or vacate.
And Joe, presumably, as you said, if he wins the WBO interim, as soon as that belt's vacated, he becomes the champion.
Yeah.
It's great stuff.
Yeah, it's great stuff. I mean, lots of ifs. But then, of course you take that, but then he'll want to go on and defend that and make the best use of it. And I think, but also we can't be so narrow-minded to think, okay, job done, Joe's a world champion. The belt is very important, and the belt brings fame and recognition. But you want someone to be taking the belt, like Joshua did when he won the IBF belt against Charles Martin, as someone that's already known, as someone with a certain level of public fame and appreciation. So that's really what we're putting. That's why I'm happy it's on pay-per-view. That's why I'm happy it's going to be promoted on BT, in Champions League, in Premier League. It's about getting Joe out there.
And just switching to some of your other fighters, how challenging has it been to stage a show in Albania for Florian Marku's homecoming?
Yeah, I mean, look, the guys Florian's so well known out in Albania. It's kind of hard to figure that out in the UK. He's had huge support out there. He's got a good team in Albania that are really pushing hard, but it has been really challenging. Yeah, I'll tell you what's been challenging is Florian's been needed to be over there, kind of promoting the fight, but he works with Grant Smith in the UK, who's firstly an absolutely fantastic trainer, but secondly is an old-fashioned kind of hard taskmaster that wants Florian here, wants him to prioritise his boxing first, as do I. And I think that's the difficulty with this fight is you've got Grant, who's a brilliant trainer who wants to put a 100% boxing performance on. And then you've got Florian, who's going back to his home country, who wants to be in his home country, promoting that fight, having 25,000 people there. It's like the moment of his life. So it's been really challenging.
Quite exciting, I guess, at the same time.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. I mean, it's going to be amazing for Florian to be back in front of his people in August, when loads of people are out, when loads of Albanians go back to Albania. Incredible opportunity for him. And there's been a lot of support from Boxer on it as well, which has been good.
Do they know who you are? Are you like a celebrity by association?
No, not at all. Not at all. A couple of random. Like my postman actually is married to an Albanian person, and he said, "You're Adam Morallee, aren't you?" I said, "Well, he says that on my mail." So my postman recognises me as Florian's manager, but that's about it.
That's something, I suppose. Always delivers. Lerrone Richards recently ended his promotional relationship with Matchroom. He's obviously previously to that was working with Queensberry. What's kind of next for him? Because he's right on the verge of a world title shot. I know he's already got the IBO belt, but right on the verge of challenging for one of the major 4 world title belts. Where does he go from here?
We're in discussions with a couple of promoters. And I'm really hopeful within 2 to 4 weeks we'll have reached somewhere with them. It's obviously lots of big fights being made by various different people. Difficult to get deals done at the moment. But I think from Lerrone's perspective, and look, I think Lerrone with Matchroom, I think Matchroom delivered him the European title, they delivered him the IBO title, delivered him some good fights actually. But I think for Lerrone, it's about right now in his career, plotting that path to a world title and having a promoter that totally sees that path for him and makes him their number one at £168. That's what he's looking for. Lerrone is a supreme talent, no disrespect to any of the other SJAM boxers, but he is one of, if not the best, purest boxer in the stable. And I think all the rest of the lads would probably agree that. So, I really think we've got to get him to where he deserves to be. And he really, really does deserve to be a world champion.
So if a key part is being the number one at £168, you've got obviously John Ryder with Matchroom. You've got, I'm blanking on his name, Zach Parker with Queensbury, of course. Sorry, Zach. It was only a temporary lapse. Presumably, if you want him to be the number one at 168, and with all due respect to the likes of Zach Chelli, Boxer seems to be a kind of intriguing destination.
Yeah, definitely an interesting destination. There are others too. You can think we're looking at America too. I mean, sometimes that can be dangerous for a British fighter, especially against someone like Lerrone, who you really want to establish here. But he's that is an overused expression, but he is a world level fighter.
Mm.
So you've got to look around the world for someone like Lerrone. But yeah, it's for me personally as a manager, I feel like we haven't quite exploited Lerrone to his full potential yet. Lerrone hasn't shown the world his full potential yet. He's a very, very high level boxer, and it's like our job to get that done.
He's got a very engaging personality too. I don't know if that always comes across, but certainly in the last few fights on Matchroom and post fight particularly.
Yeah, the hot cross buns thing when he fought the Carolis, that was good. I mean, he's a great guy. He's a brilliant guy, and he's supremely talented. But as you can see, it's sometimes a bit of a not mystery, but why some people absolutely fly and they have huge fan bases, and other people who are equally engaging don't have as big a fan base. Like, why does Derek Chisora have such a huge fan base?
Oh, you're asking me. You actually want an answer?
It's just a discussion point, isn't it? No, he
He's
does.
a cult figure, isn't he? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Engaging personality, outgoing, extrovert.
Yeah, and I'm saying it's not always. There's not always a formula for it. You see someone who's very well spoken, who's a phenomenal boxer. It just sometimes doesn't quite gel. And I think as a manager, you've got to make it work.
Good stuff. Now, before I let you go, the kind of big news of the moment, which broke last night, although it's been rumoured for seemingly weeks on end now, is that Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr., sons of legends, are going to meet in a catch weight in October. What do you make of it as a fight?
I think it's brilliant. I mean, from a business perspective, well, from a boxing fan perspective, I really want to see it. I really want to see it because I don't know how it's going to play out. I don't actually know. Have they released the details? I don't know the weight it's at.
It just said a catch weight in the press release.
Right. Okay. I don't know the weight it's at, but it's fascinating because they're two tremendous British boxers. Obviously, the dads give it added spice, and I'm sure they'll be very heavily involved in the promotion. But I like the fight because I think it's win-win for both of them, even if obviously someone's going to lose. But if either of them loses, I don't think it will affect their trajectory. I don't think it should affect their trajectory if well managed and promoted. If Conor Benn loses, he's lost to a 160-pounder and he's 147 pounds. If he wins, huge, enormous boost for him. Similarly, Eubank loses, he could be drained at the weight. He could look awful. He could say, I wasn't on my best day. So I think the downside risk for both of them is relatively low. The upside is huge. And going back to what I was talking about at the beginning, huge profile raiser for both of them. I mean, it will be talked about all week. It'll break into mainstream media. It's good for DAZN UK pay-per-view because it's a fight that the casuals will want to watch. So I think it's a genius piece of matchmaking. Maybe boxing purists will be saying, why isn't Conor Benn fighting a proper 147? Why isn't he fighting David Avanesian? Why isn't he fighting one of the American stars? And I can understand.
No casuals will be saying that though.
no casuals will be saying that.
Jesus. Because they don't know who David Avanesian is, to be fair.
Yeah, so it is a very, very good bit of boxing business. That's what that fight is.
And you mentioned DAZN pay-per-view there. I think it's going to be the second show on the UK pay-per-view for DAZN after the KSI show, which is the end of this month.
Yeah.
What do you make of them branching into pay-per-view? Obviously, there was the whole pay-per-view is dead. Since then, they've launched pay-per-view in the US
There was
already.
someone smashing it with a hammer, wasn't
Yeah,
there?
it's Canelo, I think. Yeah, but since then, but since then, they've obviously launched it in the US. They've had those discussions about why it was necessary. What do you make of it? Is it an inevitable progression?
It's business, it's just business, isn't it? People, boxing is a business. There's been very, very significant amounts of money put into DAZN. It's got to run well as a business, and they've looked at the models and they've thought, actually, there's a space here for pay-per-view. Will people pay it? Yes, they will. Can we make revenue off it? Yeah. Is it the right fights can go on that platform? So there are various issues. There's still various issues that remain unanswered about how existing customers feel about having to pay when they were told at the beginning they wouldn't have to pay for pay-per-view. I believe for the KSI fight, it's one price if you're an existing subscriber. It's another price if you're not.
Correct.
I think the original business model, though, was, the Canelo business model was, forget paying this amount of money once. You get everything, but you pay every month. So it's a big change to the business model. We'll see how it works. But it seems to me as though the attempt to change the business model, the existing business model pretty much works because there's a huge amount of money generated by pay-per-view for one-off fights.
Yeah.
And there is a huge amount of money that the public are prepared to collectively pay for big fights. Why would you take that out of the equation? I don't think it makes sense. And I think that's shown now by DAZN going into pay-per-view.
Immediate reaction: who wins the fight? Not KSI fight.
So that's why I want to watch it. That's why I want to watch it. I don't know what the catch weight is. If I knew what the catch weight was, I'd be able to give a more educated opinion. I think for anyone, I suppose your gut feel starting position is Eubank would be the favourite because he's the bigger guy.
You asking me or telling me?
No, I'm saying that's my gut. My position is they're both highly skilled boxers. I think people don't know exactly how good Conor Benn is. I think Eubank's the favourite. I haven't looked at the odds, but I think Eubank must be the favourite going into it. He's the bigger guy. He's the more experienced guy. He's the guy that's probably fought at a high level. So yeah, Eubank.
Good stuff. Adam, really, really appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you around soon. If not in the build-up, then on fight week for Joe Joyce.
See you later, Danny.
Take care, mate.